Hello, everyone. Steve Edelman here, and welcome to the Taking Control of Your Diabetes podcast. Today, my co-host is not here. He's off in Europe having a good old time, but I have a very interesting guest named Dr. Jarik Conrad, who I will let him introduce himself in more detail in a second. But he is the CEO of Human Like Me. He's written several books. He has a website. He has his own podcast called Healthy and Black. And how I met Jarik was he moved in next door to my house. And
lucky me, right?
Yeah, to have such a great neighbor like myself. And I've got to know him and his lovely wife, his two kids, and just talking on the front yard one day, he was telling me about how he got into plant-based diet. And every time I eat a hot dog, I feel so guilty now after talking to him. And actually, I have changed the way I eat to some degree based on information that Jarik gave me. And I think the best thing to do is, Jarik, tell our listeners your story, because it is pretty compelling.
Yeah, it's you used the term interesting. I guess sometimes interesting is good, sometimes we don't know, but it's certainly interesting. I grew up in a city called East St. Louis, Illinois. And so if any of your listeners have heard of East St. Louis, they would immediately, eyebrows would probably raise. It's a challenged community, to say the least. You know, high poverty rate, the education level is poor, not a lot of opportunities for people, high crime rate, you know, all that stuff. So it's one of those tough places to grow up that you hear, you know, stories, survival stories about. But one of the things that wasn't talked about enough growing up in a place like that was health, just, you know, overall health and well-being, you know, physical health as well as mental health and just, you know, overall well-being. We didn't talk about those things much. And in those communities, health is typically really poor, you know, not a lot of access to healthy foods, don't really have lifestyles conducive to, you know, healthy living. And most of those communities are located in areas where there's been heavy pollution and, you know, factories and all that. So just not the right place to grow up if you want to try to live a healthy lifestyle. So I know we'll talk, you know, more about specifics, but, you know, my family experienced some, you know, unfortunate results of growing up in a place like that. And,
well, tell us a little bit more about your family, because you've told me, and I think it's important to talk about why you made you got out of the mold of eating in that where you grew up.
Yeah. So I was always skinny as a rail, you know, so I thought skinny meant healthy. We know now skinny doesn't always mean healthy. So I didn't think much about health either. I mean, I could eat anything I wanted to and stay thin. But I started seeing my family members get sick, and then I started losing family members. So when I graduated graduate school and started my professional career, I started going to the doctor more regularly and getting health checkups and all that. And I realized that I had high cholesterol. It was like 299 at the time. And so the doctors put me on a statin to help control the cholesterol. I didn't want to be on any kind of drug. So I really started exploring what options do I have. Meanwhile, my family, people are getting sicker and sicker. So I started making changes. I first went pescatarian, so I still ate some fish and seafood. And then my wife and I went full-blown plant-based. And I dropped my cholesterol. The statin got it down to about 175, I think, and put away the statin and just went plant-based, and I got it down to 155. So it went from 299 to 155. And that's all I needed to know that this thing, there's something about this diet thing. And people started asking me for advice, and I don't like giving people advice without knowing the science. So went back, got certifications in plant-based nutrition and weight management and a personal training certification. I wanted to know as much as I possibly could for myself and for the, you know, people who I love. Meanwhile, if you fast forward to today, I am it. You know, I'm the last person standing in my family. My mother is gone. My father's gone. 4 siblings are gone. One before 40 years old, one before 50 years old, one before 60 years old, one before 65 years old. You know, all chronic health issues that may have been avoided with proper lifestyle and diet. So I'm trying to control what I can. We have no guarantees, Steve, right? But I'm trying to control what I can.
Well, I'm impressed how you educated yourself. I'd give advice with I make it up sometimes.
Well, most doctors do,
Jarik, tell us the basics of the plant-based diet, and then we'll get in a little bit to what you do at home and things like that.
Yeah, it's really just no animal products at all. So not only no meat and dairy, but no eggs, no butter and cheese. So no animal products at all. If it had a face, if it comes from something that had a face, we don't eat it. And what's really interesting about this, and what I find counterintuitive about this, at least for me and my experience, was when I became plant-based, instead of the variety of foods that I would eat, instead of that variety becoming more narrow, it actually expanded. Because there was a lot of things that I just, I liked what I liked, and I would eat the same kind of stuff. I used to love steak. Got to eat that a couple times a week, maybe. I used to love certain seafood. I'd eat that all the time. But I had some staples, so pretty consistent with what I ate. Now, it's like I've opened up this new world of possibilities. So the variety of food that I consume today is much more expanded than a variety of food I consumed back then. So I don't feel restricted at all.
Oh, I can tell it's in your lifestyle and your whole family.
Yeah.
Now, tell us a typical breakfast, lunch, and dinner that you might make for you or your family, because I think then it takes this and gives it some reality to it.
Yeah. I'll answer that question, but I'll step back and I'll reverse the question a little bit, because people don't typically ask meat eaters that question, right? And, again, with the variety of foods being so much more on a plant-based side, there are more plants than different species of animals that we eat, right?
Yeah.
The variety of foods so much more on the plant-based side. It could be, in a given day, just there are hundreds of options that we have. But for me, I typically I start my day off with a smoothie, and it's huge. It's like at least 48 ounces of the kitchen sink, whatever we have in a refrigerator.
Name some of the things.
I'll pick, I always do a couple greens, so some spinach or some kind of kale. Notice I said some kind of kale. So I might have 3 different kinds of kale in my refrigerator, at one time. And so I'll throw some greens in there, and I'll put at least a couple fruits in there, maybe some strawberry and kiwi, maybe some pineapple, just, whatever I might happen to have. Frozen fruits, because they can stay in the freezer for a long time.
Got it.
I like to get some fatty acids, so I want to get some omega-3s. Omega-3s are good for us. So I'll put some chia seeds or some flax seeds or something like that in the smoothie as well. I'll throw a banana in there. I may, especially if I'm going to be working out, I may do a protein mix, some kind of healthy protein I'll put in the smoothie as well. I might put a little orange juice in there. I'll put a little soy milk or a little almond milk, maybe some hemp milk, just, whatever I might have.
You just sort of put it in the blender. You have one of those $4,000 blenders.
I do have a Vitamix. It is, if you're going to be plant-based, you're going to have to probably invest. And I don't work for them. I don't make any money for endorsing their products, but you're going to need a good blender and that's fast. So I do that, and it takes just a few minutes. And I'll usually do a bowl of oatmeal, just plain oats with that, and then I'm fine. My son, he makes the same thing every day. He's 10 years old. He gets up. He makes a hummus sandwich every day for breakfast. So he gets up. He toasts his bread. He'll put hummus on the bread. If we have some avocado, he'll put some avocado on there. And that's going to be his breakfast every day.
That sounds good. Does bread is it a certain type of bread?
Most bread is vegan and plant-based. Some breads have eggs in it, so you kind of watch. Most of the labels will say produced in a factory that may process dairy or whatever. But most breads. Now, if we're talking about healthy options, you want to get some kind of grain, some kind of multi-grain bread or something like that with lower glycemic index, right? For purposes of our conversation. And then my daughter, she typically makes, she'll eat an apple slices and peanut butter. That's her breakfast every morning. So
I love peanut butter. And how about your wife?
Yeah. So Adrienne is a mix of stuff. She'll do a smoothie. She typically, because by the time I wake up, she's already had her workout. And so she's usually having her breakfast smoothie post workout, and she might have a little bit of tea or something like that as well. For lunch, it could be a whole host of things. For us, lunch and dinner, they're interchangeable. You can eat plants. You can eat them for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And so my lunches and dinners kind of look the same. There's usually some green, so some snap peas or some green beans or some broccoli or asparagus or something green. Typically some kind of grain, so either some quinoa or some kind of rice. And we don't do just the regular white rice. We'll do black rice or red rice or purple rice or something interesting there, and some kind of protein. So it's usually some kind of legume. Maybe there are some lentils or some black beans or some tofu. We don't do tofu every day because it's processed as well. So we try not. That's the other thing, Steve. It's not just about avoiding animal products. It's also avoiding processed foods, right? So you don't want to adopt a vegan lifestyle and just eat, processed stuff and, fried stuff and all that. You might as well get the health benefits of adopting a plant-based lifestyle.
Well, it's interesting that we ordered lunch in today from a place that you recommended, and it is called?
It's Loving Hut, which happens to be a chain. So, in a city near you, there's probably Loving Hut.
They had hamburgers, obviously not made out of meat, and they had tons of salads. I ordered a ramen like you did.
Yeah.
Well, let's turn to the plant-based diet and someone with diabetes. It seems like there's a lot of carbohydrates. And when you talk about fruit, we always try to limit the fruit, especially juices or fruit that's been ground up so it gets absorbed quicker. Yeah. And I understand, what's your response to that? I mean, and let me just say real quickly, you sent me a bunch of articles.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that, on plant-based diet and diabetes, and it has nothing but benefits. And one study I read more deeply was the one on pre-diabetes. And if you're going to prevent yourself from going from pre-type 2 to type 2, you get on a plant-based diet. And no question, it worked extremely well. So that would be a concern for some of our listeners.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Type 2 diabetes is, like 100%, dietary, right? We know that we can reverse type 2 diabetes. We know that we can help people prevent being pre-diabetic and diabetic from a type 2 standpoint. There are dozens of studies with people going on a plant-based diet for as little as 3 weeks and seeing some dramatic shifts. So I would just say I hear a lot of people, oh man, carbs, I hate carbs. All carbs are not created equally, right?
Yeah.
They're different types of carbohydrates, and vegetables are more complex carbohydrates. So they're gonna, and you can explain better than I can, but they do different things in our bodies. I think, Steve, we probably should go back to square one and just talk about food. Like, what is food? Like, what's the definition of food? Like, why do we eat? Food is the what we consume so that we can get the vitamins and nutrients and the energy that we need for our bodies to do what our bodies are designed to do. So if we consume something that doesn't have the vitamins and the nutrients and all that's necessary, then not only does it not provide us with what we need so we can live our lives, but can you technically call it food? It's a product. So people should be eating produce and not products. And probably up to 70% of what the average American eats is processed food. And again, I don't know that we can call it food. So it's this diabetes thing. It's shocking almost how quickly people respond. to shifting to a plant-based diet. And even, type 1, I think I told you I was doing a presentation before, and there was a doctor who stood up and said, "Oh, everything that you're talking about, that's for type 2 diabetes. There's nothing that you can do for type 1, and there's no impact. No matter what you eat, you can't." So, well, we're learning from these studies that there are ways to help control it.
Yeah, well, I think, that's the key. You might control it. You're not going to reverse it.
Right.
Just because it's an autoimmune condition.
Exactly.
Well, you know what? For our listeners, I might as well impress them that I am a doctor, but there are things called monosaccharides. That's basically a one sugar molecule, and that's what makes up simple sugars. Mm-hmm. You hear people talk about simple and complex. Then there's disaccharides, there's 2, and then oligosaccharides, 3 or more, and then polysaccharides, which is more of a complex carbohydrate that gets broken down slower and does not cause a spike in the blood sugar. So when people say, yeah, there's a lot of carbs in a plant-based diet, and you just have to pick and choose the right carbohydrates, and because we need carbohydrates.
Absolutely. That's where we get our energy, right?
Yeah. And I think, if I made myself a smoothie, I would go heavier on the non-fruit choices.
Right.
But, there are certain fruits that are better than others, like blueberries, strawberries, dates and bananas, might be a little too sweet, but everything in moderation.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I mean, that there are things that we can do in moderation. I will say this one thing about moderation, Steve. Let's see if we can have a fight over this one.
Hey, we can agree to disagree. But
I think there's something that I call a moderation trap. When you talk to most people, they'll say, "Oh, moderation." Well, there's some things that you just don't want in moderation. If I gave you something and I label it arsenic, cyanide, and you have these options, you wouldn't want any of that stuff in moderation, right? You don't want any of it. There are certain things that most of us eat that we probably shouldn't have at all, right? I think people would be wise to think about red, yellow, green. Green things are things that we should eat more, that we don't get enough of, that are just really healthy for us and promote this life-sustaining stuff that we need, right? And then there's things that are yellow. That's the moderation category. I like it. It's not the best thing for me. It's not the worst thing for me. Let me just track it. And then there's the red stuff. There are some things that even if you don't have diabetes, you should probably just take off the table, literally and figuratively. You just don't need it. You might not even like it. You just eat it because it's there. Like, don't buy certain things in a grocery store, because if it's in your house, in the pantry, you might eat it. So I recommend people understanding this red, yellow, green, because, for me, there are certain things that, like, I don't eat candy, but Snicker bars, or even if it is, vegan, I don't drink sodas, haven't had a soda in at least a decade. Like, there's certain things that my life is not going to change drastically if I just take that out.
It sounds like at this point you don't want it. It's not like you're saying,
want it.
I wish I could have one.
You don't want it. I don't miss meat. There's nothing that I'm like, man, if a new study came out and said this thing actually is healthy for you, it's not bad for you, it's not like, okay, great, now I can eat it. I don't want it. I just don't have a taste for it. The other thing about that moderation trap, we're not aware enough. If you ask an average person, how many of X did you have last week? The estimate that they give you is probably drastically off, right? They probably drastically underestimated what they did. So we don't have a good sense to know what moderation is. I'll give you a quick story. My brother, who is no longer with us, he was a big guy. He probably weighed 360 at one point, 6'4", big guy. He would go to, a fast food chain. I don't want to, get on here and get you in trouble for talking about certain chains and all that. But this one particular chain, he would get like 6 burgers, 4 of one kind,
McDonald's.
2 of another. Something like that. It starts with an M. It sounds something like McDonald's. He would get all these, and he'd get 2 large fries, and he'd get 2 large sodas. And if you ask him, can I have one of your fries? Man, this is all I have. And so for him, if he would have dropped to 4 burgers instead of 6, 1 large fry, 1 large soda, he would have said, man, I am doing so great. It's a moderate amount. Well, nobody would recommend that somebody eats 4 burgers and, large fries. So this moderation thing, I just warn people to be very careful about that because it can be a trap.
Well, I do say all the time, everything in moderation. So I'll be thinking twice about that.
Yeah.
But when
now, remember, I'm your neighbor, so I can watch the kind of things that you might be doing in moderation. We'll see.
Well, when you said red, green, yellow, I thought of a bowl of M&Ms. I thought you were going to talk about it. But now, let's talk about what things to look out for if you are on a plant-based diet. Anything missing? I know I've read a little bit in the materials that I've looked at, vitamin B12, maybe calcium, iron. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, there are a couple things that are probably missing in almost all of our diets. So vitamin D is one that, a lot of us are probably deficient in. So we should watch for that, get your doctor to check that. And I know I take vitamin D. I have my kids, my wife, we all take some vitamin D. The other one is B12. Because we don't naturally get B12 in a plant-based diet, so a supplement is recommended there. Something like calcium, you may get more calcium in a plant-based diet when you consider all the vegetables, the spinach and broccoli and all that kind of stuff that has calcium, probably in more abundance than even milk, right?
Yeah.
So I would just keep an eye on that. Every year, I have the doctors look at my blood work. My kids, we look at their blood work. And we see, are they low? At one point, my daughter was a little low in iron. We think that's hereditary. And so we have an iron supplement for her, but my son was fine. So I think that it's wise for people to, whether you're not on a plant-based diet or not, check your numbers.
Yeah.
But on a plant-based diet, just check your numbers. And it's not like you're going to get a little low in calcium and all of a sudden you're going to fall out. Like, oh my God, I can't do that because I might not get enough calcium. A lot of times people are looking for an excuse, right? They're looking for a way out. The thing is protein, Steve. I'm surprised you haven't said, oh, what about your protein? That's the question that all of us get as plant-based folks. My God, how do you get protein? And I'm in a gym and I'm lifting more weight than the person next to me who's saying, oh my God, I need my protein. Well, this is not working out for you the way you're eating right now.
Well, I was going to ask that, but when you went through what you ate, you included things that had protein in it.
That's
but
true.
Repeat the answer when someone says, hey, what about protein? You're not eating any animal products.
And you're getting legumes, man. Grains. Vegetables have some protein as well. But we overestimate the amount of protein we need, and too much protein is damaging for us. And the other thing that people say is, well, you need a complete protein. Meat has a complete protein, and the vegetables, they only have one source. And the reality is, you don't need to get just this whole complete protein in a meal. Over the course of a day, if you're having, just a mix of amino acid, your profile, you're going to get this complementary, the complete protein that you need. So again, studies after studies demonstrate that a plant-based diet can supply you with more than adequate amount of protein without doing the damage that the other thing is giving you. It's giving you protein, but what else is it giving you, right? Like a drug, you take a drug because it has this, healing effect for this one ailment that you have. What does the commercial always say? Side effects include sexual dysfunction and, ED and, all this, right? So think about that. How can we get that nutrient that we need without getting the side effects that we don't want?
Yeah. Now, where would someone go, and it's perhaps one of the several books you've written, to get more details on a plant-based diet? Because, there's, just, like you said, it's not just eating lettuce all day. It could really expand what people eat and it become part of your lifestyle. And look I'm always impressed on your kids. When I came over your place and you were making those plant-based crab cakes.
Yeah.
You go on vacation, you make sure that the restaurant that's associated with the hotel has plant-based chefs.
Yeah.
I was impressed with that.
Yeah.
But for them, well, before you answer where to find more information, do your kids come to you and say, Dad, I'm going to a birthday party. They're going to have hamburgers, hot dogs. How do they do?
Yeah, well, the school system, it's the schools. So before they started going to schools, we didn't have any issue. They grew up in Montessori school, and we were living in Florida at the time, and that particular school really promoted healthy eating. So much so that they told parents, look, if you send your kids here with processed stuff, we're going to throw it away, and we'll make them something. I mean, so we had a really good start. Everybody wasn't plant-based, but
Sure.
they were certainly more healthy. But then we got, past preschool into, K through 12. And that's when parents start bringing, sweets to school all the time. And that's when they started celebrating everybody's birthday, or, you woke up this morning, congratulations, let's have some cookies for that. So that became a challenge, and we just had to work it out with the school. We would buy some plant-based snacks that weren't the most healthy. A chocolate chip cookie is going to have everything, but it's going to be processed, right?
Yeah.
Just won't have the dairy in it, the eggs and any kind of dairy in it. So we would take some snacks, and they would store them so that when other kids would have cakes and cookies and all that, they would go and get, some muffins or some cookies or something that we, provided. The good news is, it's been 15 years we've been eating like this. And so now they're no longer the only plant-based person in their class now. Now we're, a lot of parents are doing, a lot of kids are trying to get their parents to go that way for animal rights reasons. When kids realize, wait a minute, I'm eating that animal, I don't want to do that. But the parents end up talking them out of it. So we just, for parties, we always bring something. Just in case they don't have anything, we'll bring something just to make sure that our kids can, have fun. But more importantly, Steve, what we're trying to teach our kids is that it's not about the food. The party is not about the food. The celebration is not about the food. The achievement is not about the food. The disappointment is not about the food, right? It's about the connections. The food is just kind of one of the things that's there. So I have this saying, don't let culture, cost, or convenience ruin your health. And, we just have a culture of, we celebrate something by destroying ourselves. And I don't get it.
You're so right. You're so right. It's, everything's centered around food.
Yeah,
for sure. But, you did mention, the environmental and animal welfare issues.
Yeah.
And for some folks, that's important to them. So you're going to tell the listeners, what's the best place to find out more information about plant-based living?
The good news is there are dozens of documentaries out there now. I happen to be in one. I have a little cameo in one called Eating You Alive. I think you can go out and get it for free somewhere.
Probably on the internet.
Yeah. You can go to Tubi or something like that, and I think you can watch Eating You Alive. But there are dozens now of documentaries that will give you, all the advice about what it is. And, this is, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. That's another place to go and get, real information from doctors who happen to be educated about nutrition, which, by the way, I know.
There's not that many. Yeah.
So that's another site. I got my training from T. Colin Campbell through his Center for Nutrition Studies. And so the research that I sent you came from that center. And so that's a great place to go. They also have a great certification program for people who are interested in digging into this a little bit deeper.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, as we get to the end of the podcast, tell us about your plans, your website, and your podcast.
Yeah. So I'm happy to announce that I am back out on my own after spending 7 years leading a thought leadership group and running a think tank with an HR software company. I am back doing coaching and keynote speaking and leadership development. And I'm really excited about this podcast that we recently started called Healthy and Black. Unfortunately, there's no secret that when you look across these categories of chronic health issues, Black people are struggling.
Yeah.
And so I think about my family, and this is a way to kind of give back to the community that I came from. Hopefully this podcast makes its way to places like East St. Louis, and we can inspire people to eat better. But not only that, I'm looking at holistic health. So I have 7 dimensions of health that we talk about. So go to jarikconrad.com, Conrad, CONRAD.com. And you can subscribe to the blog, subscribe to the podcast, and just check in and see what's up with me.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be spending more time on there. You've inspired me on this podcast, seriously.
Terrific.
And for all of the listeners, please send us questions if you have any. If it comes to our TCOID site, we will. Trust me, I'm going to send them over to Jarik, walk next door. Can you help me with this? I'm not going to be answering his questions. I can answer diabetes questions. So, Jarik, thanks so much for coming in. And we're going to be walking into the kitchen, and we're going to have some plant-based crab cakes.
Looking forward to it. And thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. And, hopefully we've awakened some curiosity in people's minds, and they can go out and explore what we've been talking about.
Alrighty. Thank you.